The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Morning, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the leaders of my constituency branch for their support in Fox Hill. I looked at them on Saturday as they were working on a south on the Fox Hill parade, and I admired them for all their hard work. And I was thinking to myself, you have to be extraordinary people, really, on a Saturday morning to leave your home and come for a political party. An election is years and years away, to work on behalf of a political party. And I thought that one of the things I could do to say thanks was basically to mention the names of some of those people who did that on Saturday, and they keep political parties going on both sides. People have a lot to say about political parties, but they are the institutions and organizations that run the country, ultimately, from the grassroots level. And it is these people who sacrifice their Saturdays to make sure that we get to do the things that we do. And so I wanted to mention the names of Charlene Marshall and Altamise Isaacs, Deidre Rowe, Hazen Pinder, Shireen Glinton Armbruster, and Ella Mae Colley, who took time out from their leisure Saturday to make sure that our branch is funded. And I hope that the government is able to do something for their hard work. I wish also to say that with some sadness and regret, announced the passing of Mrs. Beryl Rowe, who is the wife of the former Minister of National Security, the Honourable Darrell Rowe. She passed away this morning at the Princess Margaret Hospital. And so I wish to extend condolences to himself and his family on this sad occasion. And to my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Golden Gates, on the passing of his mother. And I wish to recognize also the passing of T. Boswell Donaldson, the former Central Bank governor, whose funeral I attended on Saturday, and my late friend, B.K. Barnaby, to his family, the former Commissioner of Police, and to extend sympathies to the family, the Cargill family, on the passing of their patriarch Alton, who was buried at St. Anselm's on Saturday past. You know, funerals are very interesting cultural events, Mr. Speaker, because I happened to get to sit next to the former Prime Minister in the church. And my constituents were saying we had a good time together, and indeed we did, notwithstanding it was a funeral. He accused me of spreading lies and propaganda on him, that he's coming back. And I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, but I did hear that he was coming back. He claimed that he's not coming back. Says he's finished with it, and I asked him if I could quote him. Says he claims he's detoxified of politics and that it is out of his blood. He asked me whether I believed him. I told him I didn't believe a single word. Not for 1 minute. I said, I look around and I see all your troops mobilizing in the field, man. You know, I said, but I always find it, Mr. Speaker, I said this, an interesting paradox in dealing with a former Prime Minister. As a private citizen, I've always found him socially engaging, even convivial. But do not allow him to return to power, because his personality becomes something monstrously different from what you remember with him as a social being. So I say to our leaders, be resolute and let's not go soft or wobbly. You know, stand up and fight.
Administer amen.
Yeah.
Member for Kalani.
Yes. There's a picture that was published in the press, Mr. Speaker, of a group of PLP MPs who held a press conference just after the Prime Minister's budget statement last week. And this is a group described during the campaign largely as the next generation. There was Member of Parliament for Elizabeth, Member of Parliament for Golden Isles, Member of Parliament for Pine Ridge, Member of Parliament for North Abaco, and the Member of Parliament for Southern Shores. It was an interesting experience for me because it used to be my lot in the days when we were in opposition from 2007 to 2012 to prepare the opposition's response to the government's statement on the budget. And so it was interesting to watch these individuals be the front men for the exercise this year. And this is the group that we believe are principally charged with the rescue effort for the Bahamas. Whether they know it or not, they are charged to do it, and I think they are acquitting themselves well. I start off with that because the country is in need of reform, and this is one of the signs to me that reform or change is on the way. I start off there because the criticism from the side opposite, one of the criticisms was that there isn't a budget book this year. So I just want to remind them that there's a difference of opinion, and this has been so from the time we were in opposition about this whole exercise, between the PLP and the FNM on this exercise. We said over and over while in opposition that this business was largely orchestrated by the former Prime Minister was largely a cynical waste of time. It cannot be prudent stewardship to simply bring a budget book, slice the money in half that you allocated for the fiscal year, and then pronounce that you have reported to the country the mid-year budget. And that's essentially what happened. It was foolish, a waste of time, and took us no further than we were. So this is that is the PLP's position. So what you get this time is what the PLP's, it's a mid-year budget statement, which is simply an assessment by the Minister of Finance at the mid-year as to where the country is.
Yeah. Member for Kalani, you're rising on
Yes,
a point of order.
on clarification. The member
The chair
stated,
recognizes the member for Kalani.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member stated that in our mid-year budget, we just sliced it in half. If the member would look, he would see that what was allotted on expenditure, you'd see that it was not always half. It would point out that some agencies or ministries may have spent more than half, and it was utilized as a way to curb their spending. So you know exactly where they are at this particular time. But it's not just sliced in half.
Very well. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Yeah,
member for Foxhole.
Yeah, I understand the clarification. What I remember is the thing was simply sliced in half. And it just seemed to me, well, what are we doing this for? Because, I mean, I could do that. It doesn't mean anything at all. That's what I remember. You can get a budget. What you get here is something which states the position at mid-year. And that's the way we intend to conduct the business of the House and the country. And what I further hope, Mr. Speaker, is that this year the time permits for the rules to be applied which would allow the committee process at the House to actually deal with the budget in the way it was envisaged. So that a finance committee gets to look at the budget before it's actually presented to the House. And hopefully that would be a more efficient way of dealing with these long debates that we often have. Today I propose to speak mainly about immigration, very little on foreign affairs. I would say only this about foreign affairs at the start, that I was surprised, but then again not surprised, at the tack the shadow minister took in his statement about travel. I find these arguments on travel and ministers of foreign affairs traveling and going up and down to be puerile, pedestrian, and beneath the intellect of someone at our level. Yet, I find that even with the most recent statement by the group from the College of the Bahamas, this tiresome argument about foreign minister traveling too much, a convenient argument to excite passions amongst the ignorant. My honorable friend, the member for West End, Grand Bahama and Bimini, I think dealt sufficiently with the matter, and so I leave it there, save to add that this cannot be the same shadow minister who joined us on a trip to the Turks and Caicos Islands last year. Presumably that too was a waste of time and money. This is a vexing problem for our country, and I begin, the matter of immigration, Mr. Speaker, is a vexing problem for our country. And I begin with these propositions, some of them in the form of questions. First, Bahamians are for Bahamianization in a macro sense, but in a micro sense, they want their immigrant to be granted permission to work in the Bahamas. Proposition number 2. Left to their devices, investors and their Bahamian surrogates would plan Bahamians out of the economy of the Bahamas. Proposition number 3. Immigration policy has two competing objectives: protecting the workplace for Bahamians and regulating the inflow of workers to the Bahamas where the skills are not available in the Bahamas. Fourthly, immigration is a processing ministry and has the mission of processing applications for the workers and residents who wish to live and work in the Bahamas in a timely fashion. Fifthly, immigration is an enforcement ministry and has the responsibility of arresting, detaining, and expelling those non-Bahamians who are not lawfully in the Bahamas, while at the same time being responsible for welcoming those people who are entering the Bahamas for a lawful purpose. To carry out all of these propositions, the Department of Immigration has a staff of immigration officers of 231 people who must administer these rules, laws, and policies over 26 or so inhabited islands that stretch over 400 miles of territory from north to south. The question then is, are Bahamians willing to pay for an immigration department? Some idea on the cost of this all. In this fiscal year, we budgeted approximately $1 million for repatriation. This has been reduced by some 10% due to the budget exigencies, and the amount is now, the total amount for the fiscal year is $900,000. So far this year, or at the point of the writing of this, we had used up $736,420.98 of that allocation, with a balance left for the annual allocation of $143,479,02. This figure should be reduced further by two charter payments of $27,000 each, which we had to pay to Bahamas Air to carry the recent migrants from Cat Island and Crooked Island at a cost of $20,000. The two payments of $27,000 each to Bahamas Air, and then we had to do an internal movement from Cat Island and Crooked Island at a cost of $20,000. May I have a pen that writes, please? So just to be sure, a charter, Bahamas Air jet costs $27,000 for each movement between Nassau and Port-au-Prince. And so you can take out of that what's left, the $143,000 or so dollars, you can take out an additional $27,000 because there have been two flights since then, and then the $20,000 to move those people who were found in Cat Island and Crooked Island. The detention center has an approved budget of $260,000. And again, the same reduction or for the 10% exigency. And we have spent so far at the detention center $204,892.30. The balance left to be spent for the rest of the fiscal year is $29,000 and change, $29,107.70. The estimated monthly maintenance is $3,000, cleaning is $4,300, and food is $5,000, for a total estimated monthly expenditure of $12,300 at that center. And in addition there was an unexpected expenditure to deal with some plumbing problems in the first half of $9,300. So you can see, with $29,000 left in the rest of the fiscal year, you can see exactly where we are. And we know what pressure is actually being put on the detention center because the population is asking for us to do more immigration checks. And every time you do an immigration check, that means people have to go into the detention center. The detention center itself suffered a disastrous fire some time ago, and new dorms have to be built. Now, in terms of revenue generated by the department, the projected revenue for the first 6 months of the fiscal year was $22,829,082 and no change. So approximately $22.9 million. In the first 6 months of the year, immigration took in some $20,511,374.93. So there was a shortfall in the projections for the mid-year of $2,317,707.07. I'm advised that there are two reasons for this. The projections for the year at the start were overly ambitious, and secondly, there is a need to collect monies which are owed the department. And I've been assured that the department will be pursuing these arrears of payments. In terms of total migrants repatriated by the department last year, in the period January to December 2012, some 3,134 people were repatriated. Of that number, 2,496 were Haitian, 638 were other nationals. Clearly, the incursion into our country of undocumented migrants from Haiti is our challenging immigration issue. It is also a national security problem, and it is a social and economic issue. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, migrants are drawn to this country because their labor is in demand in this country. They are willing to do jobs which Bahamians are said not to want at prices which are now on offer in the labor market. When I spoke to this issue last year, I said that I was unwilling on my own to start a revolution in terms of turning down thousands of requests for work permits for live-in maids, companions, caregivers, laborers, and farmhands. And I remembered in connection with this the story of a minister from the former government who came to me and said one of his colleagues who was Minister of Immigration had refused a work permit request for him, for his housekeeper, saying that it was against the policy. And the next thing I knew, that minister was joining the diplomatic corps, sipping wine on the Great Wall of China. So I thought to myself, well, that's not where I want to end up. But the conventional wisdom is that Bahamians will not do these jobs. The result is that people from Asia now populate the homes of the well-to-do from Lyford Key to the Eastern Road and all points in between. And Haitians are the nationality of choice in the laboring sector. Bahamian business people come to the department all the time and they say they're unable to find Bahamian laborers with the necessary work ethic at the price being offered for their labor. The Cabinet has asked that we work in conjunction with the Department of Labor and the National Training Program so that within a year we will be able to stop issuing work permits for maids, housekeepers, and laborers. And I say this only as a warning shot about what is likely to come. And I say this also in the presence of MPs because you can expect, I can predict, in the way of significant pushback from the business community if the policy is implemented, and there are going to be attendant political costs. So I make that point clearly. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now, there are several immigration products, and I put them this way because I think that accurately describes where we are in the immigration sphere. And I begin with citizenship. Citizenship is granted to the wife of a Bahamian man, generally not granted before 5 years of marriage, now costs $250. Permanent residence for that spouse costs $250. The resident spouse permit costs $250, and you know we amended the law with regard to that. The permanent residence certificate costs $250, and citizenship for a spouse is $20. Husband of a Bahamian woman, generally not granted before 10 years of marriage. The resident spouse permit is $250, and the permanent residence is $250. The citizenship is $500. Registration of a minor child, that of a person who is the child of a Bahamian woman born abroad to a non-Bahamian father to whom she is married. Commonwealth citizens, it's $20 for each child under 18. Over 18, it's $15 for each child. Other nationalities, it's $100 for the first child, $20 for each additional under 18 years, provided the applications are submitted at the same time, and over 18 years, $500 each upon application. That of the child of a Bahamian naturalized after the child's birth, and this is an area of some controversy as well, because what happens is that you can become a Bahamian citizen, naturalized, and then you have minor children who, of course, don't have your nationality. They have their nationality of origin, and before their 18th birthday, you can register them as a Bahamian. There's been some pushback on the fact that this is being used by people to get citizenship of the Bahamas in some kind of backhanded way for their children. People, particularly those who come here first as illegal migrants. So in this case, it's $100 for the first child, $20 for each additional under 18 years, provided the applications are submitted at the same time. Registration of persons as citizens of the Bahamas who are Commonwealth citizens. This is in the 10 years residency category. Certain policies, certain categories by policy, like doctors and other professionals, are not granted until at least 20 years of residency. And in this case, it's $500. In my view, Mr. Speaker, there needs to be an omnibus provision, and this would require an amendment to the Bahamas Nationality Act, to grant citizenship of the Bahamas to anyone in the public interest, so that this would give a discretion to the Governor General to grant citizenship if the public interest requires it. And at the moment, that's not possible because you have all these residency requirements that you have to meet before. Some people, and I mention this business about products because some people have been pressing the Bahamas to offer economic citizenship. This is not presently offered, and there's considerable resistance in the Bahamian community toward this. Some of our countries, fraternal countries or sister countries in the Caribbean, like St. Kitts, for example, and Dominica, have this economic citizenship. And what it comes with is, with a certain level of investment, you're able to get this passport. Of course, it does not give you the right to vote in those countries, but you get this passport. And the question is whether or not this is something that the Bahamas wants to offer. It appears to me you'd have to amend the Constitution, and you'd also have to amend the Nationality Act. At the moment, the closest thing we have approximating it is a policy that if you invest $1.5 million in the country, you will get accelerated consideration for permanent residence with the right to work, and that accelerated consideration is supposed to be 3 weeks, but there are some challenges in connection with that, which I'll come to later. So to move from citizenship to permanent residence. A child of a Bahamian born outside the Bahamas to a parent who got their citizenship under Article 3.2 of the Constitution. Article 3.2 is the one that says, and I call this the Sidney Poitier article because he was born to a Bahamian outside the Bahamas, but he can't pass his citizenship on to his children unless they were registered as citizens of the Bahamas prior to their 18th birthday, or they're willing to renounce their citizenship of origin after their 18th birthday. So In these cases, a minor who seeks to register, the cost is $20. For other nationalities, for Commonwealth minors, $20. For other nationalities, $100. And for adults, $500. There's some suggestion that the fee ought to be raised for adults to $1,000. Child of a Bahamian born to a Bahamian woman, married to a non-Bahamian father outside the Bahamas. Normally, minors apply under the previous provision that I said for citizenship and register themselves as citizens before. But if they do apply for permanent residence after their 18th birthday, the cost is $250. At the moment, Mr. Speaker, the policy is that persons who invest $500,000 in a property in the Bahamas are granted the right to work, granted permanent residence without the right to work, so-called economic permanent residence. The question is how is the value of the investment determined? Is it the assessed value or the conveyed value? Should this amount be raised, and to how much? Should it be in a residence or any investment? And can the individual hold it if he buys a residence in a company? This is granted, as I said, without the right to work. What I'm advised is that the property is assessed on the purchase price as shown on the conveyance or on an appraised value. The stamp duty is not included, and there's some suggestion that stamp duty should be included. A new home is given the value of the cost of the property, the cost to build, and the cost of the contents and landscaping. Again, stamp duty is not included. When a home is purchased, the value is assessed by the amount paid plus any renovations made. Stamp duty, again, is not included. The amount should be raised, some suggest, to $1 million and should be in any investment of that amount as opposed to in a home. And the purchase at the present policy may be in a company as long as the individual is the sole beneficial owner of that company. This is a product, Mr. Speaker, marketed by the financial services sector. And that sector criticizes the slow process of approvals. Also, there is political criticism that the threshold of investment is too low, and it is being used for people to get a backdoor way into the country to work and compete with Bahamians. The product, it was said, was not designed for this. And here's how it works. Person comes in, gets so-called economic permanent residence, flips the property, doesn't keep the property, and then after a few years of being here, applies to have permanent residence with the right to work added on the basis that he or she either wants to work in their own business or just a general right. So it's saying that defeats the purpose of this particular policy. And then there are various permutations, like with the right to work in one's own business. That the cost of that is $10,000. And if increasing the investment amount, I think they're saying that the cost should actually be raised. Then you would have, with the right to work, for example, as a teacher. This is often given to people who've been teaching here in the public system for some time, and so they are rewarded, so to speak, with permanent residence with the right to work as a teacher, and the cost for that is now $1,000. It's largely given to teachers who live here for 10 years or more and have given good service to the country with the support of the Ministry of Education or the school in which they work. And then there's an unrestricted right to work, also attached to permanent residence. It's granted to spouses of Bahamians generally after 5 years of a resident spousal permit. Now possible, of course, for a resident spousal permit to be given indefinitely. But one of the issues which has arisen is the banks are not recognizing resident spousal permits in the same way they recognize permanent residence. And so certain amendments have to be made in the property laws to recognize resident spousal permits for the purposes of these various land and banking transactions. At the moment, this RSP costs $250. It is also granted, permanent residence is also granted to people living in the Bahamas who've applied for citizenship, like those who have the constitutional entitlement to apply at their 18th birthday, and for some reason the cabinet decides not to grant citizenship to them, then they are given a lesser status, which is permanent residence with the right to work, and that at the moment costs $50. Non-nationals born here who miss the application by their 19th birthday under the Constitution, or who have run afoul of the law in some way, and the cabinet determines that they want a period of testing before granting citizenship, the cost of that is the permanent residence certificate in those circumstances is $500. Permanent residence granted to someone who's been living and working here for a long period of time but does not want to give up their citizenship of origin, generally granted after 10 years of residence, the cost is $5,000. And that granted to high net worth individuals is $10,000. The question is whether there are some other specific policy requirements that ought to be attached to the granting of this status. There should be, for example, a provision that the investment is maintained for a period of 10 years at least, and if they wish, there's another investment to maintain the conditions of the permanent residence. One thing I thought of, Mr. Speaker, was to attach a condition that at least 4 Bahamians ought to be hired for this accelerated consideration of $1.5 million investment plus the hiring of 4 Bahamians. Permanent residence, as is citizenship, is granted by the cabinet in its discretion. Annual residence, Mr. Speaker, this is a form of extended stay in the Bahamas, which is granted annually for those who have a home here or who just want to live here and can support themselves without working and do not want to have permanent residence, or who are the family of Bahamians, like mothers-in-law, and need for a status longer than a visitor's stay. And that at the moment costs $1,000. There's also a homeowner's card. Applicants must own a principal home in another country while owning one in the Bahamas. There must be proof of ownership in both cases. The card is issued in accordance with the International Persons Land Holding Act 1993. A homeowner resident card permits someone with a residence in the Bahamas to enter the country as often as they like during the course of the 12-month period in which the card is valid. And the cost for that is $250. To turn to work permits. Work permits can be granted in law for any period of time, but the costing is done in annual terms by various categories, ranging from as low as $1,000 per annum for the ordinary worker to as high as $12,500 at the top categories. Laborers, caregivers, live-in maids by far are the most applied for category. Caregivers, live-in maids, housekeepers, and like groups together. If I can just give you an example of the numbers, for that category, last year there were 343 new applications and 1,458 renewals, for a total of 1,800 caregivers, live-in maids, housekeepers granted last year. In the category of laborers, gardeners, handymen, and that group together, last year was 449, and renewals 1,891 for a total of 2,340. The policy, of course, with all of these matters is not to grant work permits where a Bahamian can do the job. A labor certificate is required to show that, and no Bahamian is available. And until recently, labor certificates seem to be granted somewhat routinely. Professional bodies now are now consulted on whether or not the work permit should be granted. There's no limit on the number of times they can be granted. And what happens is that over time, people build up residency and ties in the country and qualify then for permanent residence. There is some resistance at the policy level to this, and the suggestion is to reimpose a limit of a maximum of three-year work permit terms. This proved unworkable in the past because of the lack of an enforcement mechanism. There are no written policy guidelines which survive from minister to minister. The business community complains about the lack of expertise in the Bahamian community and the lack of quality in that expertise, and they also complain that for the Bahamas to compete, it must have flexible work rules and policies to allow for the importation of labor. Granting of work permits is therefore highly subjective. We have, since coming to office, attached as we can in law various conditions that an understudy must be identified and hired before a work permit is granted. And this is still, however, a difficult policy to enforce. We've been trying to work with the Ministry of Labor with a view to eliminating the granting of work permits for laborers, maids, and handymen. I fear the reality is that given the demand from the Bahamian worker for foreign labor, that this is an idle hope, and I expect that this subject will continue to be a matter of debate for some time to come. Indeed, the policy on work permits is filled with traps where the aims and objectives of the policy are antithetical one to another. Recently, we granted a work permit to a law firm to manage their business. They pleaded the case that this was a specialized skill not available in the country. The Bar Association opposed it. The lawyers in their own firm opposed it. It is unlikely that in these circumstances it will be granted again. But the management of the firm made a compelling case. One of the newspapers continues to ask for work permits to manage their newspaper. There's no question in the minds of the Immigration Board that this paper can be run by Bahamians. This is a case where on appeal we have asked that an understudy be identified and that one final permit has been granted. I've been spending, as minister, much time in Grand Bahama, where the issue of the granting of work permits is most vexing. I intend to spend every Friday there in support of the work of the Ministry of Grand Bahama until I have the sense that this immigration matter in Freeport is brought under control. I have met with the Grand Bahama Shipyard and City Services. I will meet with Borco and Club Fortuna and other businesses and businessmen in Grand Bahama. We provide a support role to the Ministry of Grand Bahama, and the Minister of Grand Bahama sits in on all Immigration Board meetings in Freeport. If the complaints continue about Bahamians looking from the outside to the inside, we have made it clear to industry in Grand Bahama that we will begin to refuse all requests for work permits cold turkey unless there is a clear understanding of the need for policies to hire and train Bahamians. Indeed, one of the more fascinating conversations that I've had in Grand Bahama in relation to immigration policy is a well-known FNM activist and relative of the leader of the opposition who argued strongly in favor of a program that will enforce training as a requirement. He argued that over the years, since the Pindling administration, the training regime which allowed many Bahamians to take their places managing the companies in Grand Bahama fell away. And the result is that in Grand Bahama, we have to start all over again. My concern as minister is that in too many cases, Bahamians are being planned out of investments in the Bahamas. The investor comes with the view that Bahamians need not apply. And in the past 20 years, 15 of those headed by the FNM, the policies have tended on an official level to support that view. I say no more and enough of it. The question I have is whether this next generation has the stomach for the pushback, knowing that in many cases the pushback will come from the very Bahamians we are seeking to help. I would like to respond to the concerns of our supporters in Grand Bahama, indeed all citizens of Grand Bahama, who have complained about the coming of foreign workers to the facilities of city services who've just gotten a big job to build a device for a company in New Jersey. The Ministry of Grand Bahama has met with the company and warned them that they are to perform the promises that they made when we agreed to grant these work permits. This means that Bahamians on the job who were dismissed were to be rehired, and there's to be a training program. The permits will be revoked if the Ministry of Grand Bahama certifies that the conditions under which they were granted were not or are not being met. There is, Mr. Speaker, a general workers permit which is granted to spouses of Bahamians for a cost of $1,000, where a spousal permit is not granted, and may be a substitute where a widow or a widower of a Bahamian loses her status to an RSP because of the death of her husband or wife. And just to explain that, a resident spousal permit falls away once the person becomes a widow or a widower. And so this is a status which is often used, and it may be that the law will have to be amended again so that once you don't remarry, upon death, the status remains. That might be the equitable thing to do. The law allows the minister to grant a work permit for any period of time, but usually it is not granted for more than 3 years and most times annually. One product that the financial services sector has been thinking about is the 10-year work permit, which will be given to managing director level jobs for $500,000. It's been recommended, however, that we look instead at a product that is 5 years at a cost of $250,000 and renewed for another 5 years because, management may want to change. They may want to bring someone in midstream. But we're trying to think of ways in which to make the granting of work permits at that very top level more rational, equitable, and certain. And so the idea is to give a long-term work permit and to charge $500,000 for 10 years. The fees for work permits, permanent residence, and citizenship are all being looked at and are likely to be adjusted to reflect the premiums which they draw and the actual cost of delivering the service. More then should be heard about this when the annual fiscal budget is done. I encourage those who have views about these matters, as I propose them from this statement, to reduce this to a permanent form as a framework of the new policies of the department going forward. So I would encourage any feedback on any of these ideas that have been advanced before the Cabinet actually settles what the framework policy is in a written form. But my suggestion will be that the fees should increase substantially to reflect the premium of someone wanting to live in the Bahamas. And we see this happening because with the tax laws changing in Europe and in the United States, there is an increased demand for the right to live in the Bahamas and work in their own business. I wish now to turn to some meetings that have arisen with various professional and trade bodies in the Bahamas and the decisions on policy which are likely to come arising out of those meetings. Photographers and videographers have complained that they are being denied jobs in the tourism sector by foreign photographers and videographers. They've also met with the Ministry of Tourism. And I've agreed that all the hotels are to be called in and advised that we take a dim view of this, and in the future there will be increased scrutiny of requests for those artists who come into the country to do this kind of work. There will also be increased scrutiny at the border where people say that they are part of the family in a wedding but are actually professional photographers or videographers. There are also, by edict of the Cabinet, to be no work permits issued to foreign fishermen. There will be increased scrutiny for any request for gemologists at various jewelry stores in the Bahamas. Given the report to us that this is a skill that can be taught within a relatively short space of time, the idea is to stop issuing them altogether by next year. We have met the publishing community and agreed that there will be increased many businesses have 3 or 4 of them. And what the suspicion is, the complaint has been from the Bahamians in the sector, is that these gemologists are actually being used as a means of getting foreign nationals in here to be salespersons, that they're not gemologists at all. And that in any event, the skill of a gemologist can be picked up in a relatively short period of time. We have met with the publishing community and agreed that there will be increased scrutiny of traveling ad and print salesmen coming into the Bahamas. We intend to meet with all hotels and major businesses and advise them that work permits must be produced from anyone who is marketing those skills in the Bahamas who is not Bahamian. There will be increased scrutiny at the border on this. Similarly, we are concerned about the number of applications we are receiving for assistant hotel managers and for food and beverage directors and butlers. This is a matter which ought to be addressed by the hotel sector, and there appears to be a need for additional training opportunities since this is going to become an increasing practice and demand. Given the developments in Bimini and the construction program in Cat Key, there will be increased scrutiny about the work practices in Bimini and in Cat Key. We are working with the Ministry of Tourism to ensure that local fishing guides in Bimini are not facing competition from outside fishermen, again, using the guise of standards as a means of excluding Bahamians from the right to take tourists out to fish in their own country. And you will very often get this pushback from hoteliers that the standards of Bahamian boats aren't high. The Bahamian fishermen don't offer the level of service which they require. And we believe that that's really a disguise, simply to get, in very many cases, their friends who they know from overseas in here to get work permits just to do fishing. The Department of Immigration wants to be certain that the plea that there is a need for excellence in service is not a mask for preventing Bahamians from getting jobs in the sector which are rightly theirs. I also want the people at Emera and Freeport Power in Grand Bahama to be aware of the increased scrutiny that is being conducted with regard to their applications as well. The concern that is flagged is that applications for work permits are being used to help deregister the union at the power facility in Grand Bahama. I wish also to say that we're going to look more closely at the use of the short-term work permit procedure, which some have been using to get long-term work permits by stealth and without getting the necessary checks like a labor certificate done. As I said earlier, the department now consults all the professional bodies before a work permit is issued. These included, but are not limited to, the Bahamas Contractors Association, the Bahamas Bar Council, the Bahamas Engineers Board, the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants, and the Bahamas Christian Council. Where there is some greater latitude with regard to bringing in professionals is likely to be the financial services sector, given the international nature of the business, and this will include, as we move along, the setup of international arbitration matters within the Bahamas. Again, however, we will need to know that Bahamians can maximize the opportunities in this sector through training and exposure to opportunities, and we will seek to ferret out whether the plea for the international nature of the business is not a mask to keep Bahamians out of the sector. I wish to comment on the interdiction activities of the department. The people of the Bahamas have never quite made up their mind which side of the immigration debate they are on. And now the immigration minister, one in a line of ministers of immigration pursuing a policy that has veered from rounding up Haitians and throwing them out of the country, while having to grant work permits to scores of landed immigrants and illegal immigrants who Bahamians want to work for them. I described it earlier like this. Bahamians, in a macro sense, are for Bahamianization, but in a micro sense, they want their immigrant to work for them. There is another issue within the immigration debate. That comes when it comes to the processing of applications for legal immigrants or to regularize those immigrants who have applied for status when they have no status. These days, it is taking routinely 7 or 8 months for applications to be considered, a combination of poor equipment and slow processing for one reason or the next. The Nassau Guardian, in a recent editorial, made the point that immigration processing is slow. They said that if the Bahamas wants to be a modern and progressive financial services center, they had better get their act together and get it together fast. Fast. I agree, but I ask the question in a time of scarce resources in the Bahamas, and by this I mean the Bahamian people, are they willing to set aside the resources to run a properly funded immigration department? Right now, as I said earlier, there are 231 immigration officers tasked with running the immigration affairs of the Bahamas. They have no boats, few vehicles, and an enforcement capability of 12 people. Compare this to the police, who have 3,000 men and women, and the RBDF that has some 1,500. So you figure what can be done and cannot be done in these circumstances. Clearly, a reevaluation is required on this issue. That would be no neat hat trick in these days and times. Part of what we think needs to happen is that immigration fees will have to increase to cover the cost of operating the department, but that will also mean that the cost of business is going to go up in the coming years. Is this the price we have to pay, however? There are checks made by the enforcement department, and within the next 2 months, there will be increased scrutiny in New Providence at the various shanty towns, communities where there are complaints, including but not limited to Eleuthera, Harbor Island, and Abaco. When I spoke at the start of the term, I indicated that Bahamians may need to become accustomed now to carrying on their persons some document which ties you to citizenship or residence in this country. This is a civil rights issue, and one which I do not like myself, but given the demand for increased scrutiny, I know of no other way to resolve this. Some are even calling for a national identity document which would be conclusive proof of your status in the country. The increased scrutiny, however, which puts additional strains on the department's manpower already strained for the demands, will continue. It needs modern weapons and non-lethal interdiction equipment. It requires substantial overtime. And promotions have been put on hold by me in an attempt to rectify certain anomalies, and this has adversely affected morale, but we are working to get it done as quickly as possible. The detention center will require an upgrade, as you heard from the parliamentary secretary, and there are serious challenges there. You are aware of the incursions into our waters by Haitian migrants. A meeting was immediately convened with the American government with regard to this matter. We also consulted with the Haitian government as well. One story is that the incursions are being driven by people who market the journey to the U.S. from the north of Haiti by telling these unfortunate souls that President Obama will be offering an amnesty in the United States soon. This is certainly bad information, but the result is that we are, in the first 2 months of the year, over half of where we were in terms of interdictions. And the figures reveal that in the first 2 months of the year, we have some 600 people in the first 2 months of the year, compared to just under 2,000 that we repatriated all of last year. In the first 2 months, we're now at 600. So, in our meetings with the Americans, we talked about sharing of intelligence and information. One of the things they will be doing is there'll be more thorough interviews with migrants before their return to see when people set out to sea where they are, so that the Americans can immediately shift their assets in the water to where people launch out to sea. Because it's the advice is that people they generally set out to sea in groups. They don't just come one boat at a time. And so if we act quickly enough, we may be able to shift the assets to be able to interdict those who are following. I say again that there will be no publicity connected with these immigration checks. They will continue without fanfare and on a sustained basis to the extent that the resources will allow. I want, however, to be sure that the message goes forth that even though someone is here illegally, they are human beings and have a right to the security of the person and to their property. We do not encourage or condone the violation of any of those rights, and on this occasion I specifically deplore it where it occurs and demand that it stops if people are contemplating it. The fact is, we are dealing with human beings. Many of their compatriots helped to build this country over the centuries, and they must be treated with dignity and respect even as we enforce the laws. We are working with the United Nations, the International Organization for Migration, and the United States to do our best in terms of manpower, equipment, and intelligence to spot those who are setting out to sea and to stop them from coming here and getting into the Bahamas illegally. I deplore prejudice of any kind, and I do not think being Haitian is the equivalent of being illegal. And that is why our visa policy, for example, has changed with regard to Haitians, and they're now treated like any other individual who wishes to come to this country and not discriminated against ab initio as if they're criminals because of their nationality. Mr. Speaker, I have a philosophy on these matters as I turn to more general concerns. When the Ministry of Finance's people came to see the Cabinet to tell us that the expected $500 million deficit and how it was to be financed, I had one question. Are you saying that you will have problems finding the money? And they answered no. After that, I closed my mind to any discussion or further thought on finances. I'm a great believer in the division of labor. Finance people do finance work. I am the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration. I do Foreign Affairs and Immigration's work. Finance's job is to manage the money. Once the budget is passed and you give me a task to do, then it's the job of the finance people to deliver the money. I'm interested, of course, in how it's going about doing the job, but I'm not concerned myself with that job. I have my job to do. It's cold and efficient, perhaps, but that's my view. These young ministers that I mentioned earlier have been given a job to do, and my view is give them the money, let them do it. And if they don't get results, then you know what to do. And I warn them all, don't come back swinging your hand. Their job is to go out and find the revenue, find the money, find the business for this country. That's what the people of the country expects of them. And I have no doubt that they have the talent to do it. And they have the support of the government to do it. What I would say also, though, about the philosophy of budgeting, and perhaps this is a hangover from the influence of the debate in the U.S. and in Europe, is we concentrate far too much on savings, like a matron trying to stretch her pennies, rather than concentrating on finding money or revenue. This country needs to grow, and we're not going to grow by cutting back always on spending. We need to find the money. The money, Mr. Speaker, did not disappear into thin air. It is still there, and they're out there somewhere, and we need to find a mechanism, a product in the Bahamas that people want to buy. What is it that people want to buy from us? I think professionals need to be applied to this. Professional thought needs to be applied to this. But if I were to guess, I would say it is the right to live and work in the Bahamas. So the question of revenue then should be an easy one. What mix of products can we offer in the Bahamas, can we offer today, which can provide a cash injection into the country, a right to stay here without adversely affecting our way of life, our culture, and our sovereignty? I intend to speak to some suggestions on immigration policies, what I've already done so, and I've done so in the form of this idea of the sloth and inertia in our systems. And this is one of the great things about values of having young people around, because they can be trained in new ways and bring innovation to a project, and they don't resist change. And it is a matter which is on my mind very much because last week one of the smartest of our young Foreign Service officers announced that he's going to be leaving the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I didn't ask him what the reason was, but I would guess the reason is the question of salary and benefits. And in a time when resources, we're strained for resources, this is a difficult matter to solve. But we have to solve it, otherwise we will lose the talent in the public service that we need. The Permanent Secretary and I were talking the other day because there's another very smart young man who is a Foreign Service officer, a leader in his church, valedictorian in his class, at the undergraduate level, master's degree. He wants to pursue a PhD. But these days, a PhD costs maybe $65,000 a year to do. And the question is there anything we could do to help him and at the same time keep the expertise that we need going forward? Because what you need in the Foreign Service is a combination, well, in any service, in any job, is a combination of the experienced and the new talent. And we made a mistake by putting a moratorium on hiring some years back, because what developed in the public service now is a level of expertise which is way up there on the level of age, senior years, and expertise way down there, and the middle is gutted. So it's an issue we have to resolve. And I tell this story because I remember when I came home from school, this is about assisting our younger people. When I came home from law school, Levi Gibson, who was then alive, my godfather, took me by the hand to see Harold Longley, who was then the manager of the Royal Bank of Canada. And Mr. Gibson said something like this: he needs a car, he needs some startup money, and the bank manager said to him, how much does he need? He told him, signed on the bottom line, and out I went. And I only say that because we have to give people a start. We have to give people a start. And so I hope that as we develop along, we start thinking in terms of what we can do to help people get this start. The country is mainly a young country, and its talent is reposed in young people. And Kofi Annan has said, in a speech he said once, that in every development project in the country, we should make sure that we have specific set-asides for young people and take the extraordinary steps that are necessary to make sure that they get integrated into the economy. And with Baha now developing, promising 7,000 jobs, that is the job number one for immigration, to make sure that we keep Baha honest as an investment with regard to that and Bahamian jobs. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, with more young people around, I remember young people who worked in the campaign, how much that affected the way the campaign ran and our success in the campaign. One suggestion I have is that I remember proposing in 2002 as the public service minister that all new public servants, I said at the time, should work on contracts rather than come through the public service, because this would allow you the flexibility to pay more, to provide a premium, without having to concern yourself about the pension aspects of it, and you would get a gratuity at the end of the contract. Well, what resulted in that? I think I got my head chopped off at that time. Mr. Speaker, I wish, as I come to the end of this presentation then, to leave that message with the House, that we must do something exceptional to support young people and their integration into the economy of our country. In order to accomplish the tasks, Mr. Speaker, given to anyone as a public official, reputation is everything. I don't have money. I will not have money. I've said previously what my views are on that. But in the meantime, to accomplish what I've done, your reputation must be intact. My reputation as a political leader of the ministry is tied to so many things. My reputation affects the staff, whether they want to work with me in that ministry. My reputation affects the government and whether it can survive or not. My reputation affects the ability to get things done in the sense that people will do things for someone who has a good reputation. So there's no surprise when people who are opposed to you try to sully your reputation. It is an occupational hazard of politics, and you will remember Dion Folks, the former minister, seeking to sully my name, suggesting I was involved in corrupt behavior, using in aid and comfort the word of a corrupt public servant, and I fought that. In the 40-so years of public life and 20 years of official public service, there have been many attacks on me. And when I last spoke in this place, I made a passing reference to my support for the rights of LGBT people as far back as 1978. This has now become the subject of an assault on my reputation, which is an example of the kind of prejudice at work in the country, which is the kind that cannot be outlawed, but which exists all the same. You know, I've thought about this long and hard, and I want to be very careful about what I say, and I'm not going to call any names. But I would say, Mr. Speaker, that at the age of 59, I want to tell people, do not confuse politeness and civility for weakness. Do not confuse politeness and civility for weakness. And it is unfair to me to mischaracterize what I said in this place. In effect, it accused me of a contempt of Parliament by suggesting that I am doing something other than pursuing the general interests of the Bahamian people, that I am somehow pursuing some hidden agenda. Part of the difficulty with dealing with this, of course, is that many of my friends are afraid for me, that this is an issue that is perceived as being so, that this is an issue that can undermine my ultimate political goals, that I will be swallowed up by the prejudice that my comments excite, and that I'll be unable to defend myself against it. I understand their fears, Mr. Speaker. I want you to know I have none, and I am fearless.
Brave.
When my mother died, it was the last time I felt any fear was when my mother died. And I was afraid of how I was going to act when my mother died. But that's past. And I am absolutely secure in who I am and what I believe, and I want friend and foe alike to know, even from the pulpits, that if this is to be a time of testing, then so be it. I happily enter it. And if I may continue. There was an article in Esquire magazine some time ago talking about men when they're 40-something. And this man, 40-something, woke up and he looked in the mirror and he said to God, "Help, I'm becoming to look like my father." So at the age of 59, you can well imagine when I wake up and I look at myself in the mirror, I'm becoming more and more my father's son in more ways than one. And in the last years of his life, Mr. Speaker, my father did two things as habits which I now recall, and increasingly I've come to adopt. One is he kept reading the Bible, and I had never known him to be a man of faith. And in that connection, I recall the quip reportedly made by W.C. Fields, the American actor, who was a well-known atheist, and at the end of the life was sitting on the porch reading the Bible. His friends, of course, were very surprised. So they asked him, what was he doing reading the Bible? And he said, checking for loopholes. So maybe this is what I'm doing, but I'll come back to the Bible later. The second habit my father had, which we always found as an amusement. My godmother, Satella Cox, reminds me of it all the time. My father's solution to every intractable problem was, if only I had my cutlass. If only I had my cutlass. And this harks back to the days when he used to sleep with the cutlass under his bed. And he used to ride around with the cutlass in his car. And, you know, we used to always say, Dad, you know, you're 82 years old. What are you going to do with that but hurt yourself? So increasingly, when I'm faced with the kind of nonsense that happens about your political commentary, that's what I think in my head. So I just want to thank, though, there's a letter writer named Paula Hall. I don't know if the person is writing under a nom de plume for standing up and responding to what I thought was an offensive attack on something which was quite an innocuous statement said in here. And I want to make this point about rights, and when we say we stand up for the rights of people. We were in opposition. At one of the press conferences, the then leader of the opposition was asked, did the PLP support a resolution of the UN, which the FNN government had voted on, which supported the rights for LGBT people? And he said, yes, we did. That caused a ripple, even in our own party. But the rationale was this, Mr. Speaker, and I want to be very sober about this. Because, people make this stuff and then, it all becomes a joke and who is one and who ain't one and all the rest of that. I'm very serious about this matter. How could the Bahamas, this is what we said, how could the Bahamas, a nation of majority black people, and I mean no disrespect to any other race, but simply drawing attention to the fact of our particular history, victims of discrimination, prejudice, violence, support a resolution which, if passed in the negative, could mean the Bahamas supported violence against people. How could we do that? I say that deliberately. And I put all this business of orientation aside. The resolution was to support measures to stop violence against people. In other words, the resolution was saying that just because you had a particular order, you did not deserve violence against your person. You don't stop being a human being. How could the Bahamas not support that? And the issue of marriage equality is a separate issue. That's not a public policy issue before us at this time. The Attorney General has made that quite plain, what the government of the Bahamas' position is on that. And I don't want people imputing motives to me which do not exist. Which do not exist. When it comes to that, I have no personal opinion. It's like when the former Prime Minister, Sir Lyndon Pindling, when he was asking me about joining the PLP, said, now, there are two problems you got. One is you owe the PLP $12 in dues, and the second is you're against capital punishment. And the PLP is for it. So what's your position on that? So I said, well, I'm joining the party. It's the policy of the party, so I support the policy of the party. That's it. So the government's policy is the government's policy, and the Attorney General has made that absolutely clear. So, I do say this, though, from a personal point of view. How can someone who has been a progressive all his life, a liberal all his life, when faced, and a libertarian, thank you, sir, when faced with the question of the protection of rights for anything, any person, how can I then say I'm not for that? I mean, the Bahamian people would think I'm a hypocrite. And I'm not seeking to get into any moral argument, sir, no religious argument. I said before, that's not my business. I'm not getting in that sphere. I'm the MP for everybody in the constituency, regardless of who they are, what they do, so on and so forth. That's me. And it's a neutral platform.
And we are the government of everyone.
Well, when the PLP asked me to go campaign in Foxhill, I go door to door. And I've been to several homes, and people says, what's the relationship between these two people? I say, that's my friend. She's my friend. So what am I supposed to do? I say, no, I don't want you to vote for the PLP. And that's what my public life has been all about. The Bible, sir, has some wonderful quotes. It says, judge not, and you shall not be judged. It also says, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. And it also says, blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. I hope it's pellucidly clear. And I hope nobody comes, with this ducking and dodging at me and trying to suggest anything untoward than what it is. Because everybody knows me, that I am perfectly capable of saying anything at any time that I want to say. Please. 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 And so, Mr. Speaker, I leave that there. I hope I've dealt with it as effectively as I can. sought not to be offensive to any individual, but to put the principle of how we act and how I behave and conduct my public life. I said both my public life and my private life is conducted with circumspection, because reputation affects everybody. Everybody. So, I thank you for your indulgence on that subject, but I wish finally to thank the principal and teachers of the Sandilands Primary School for teaching and instructing the winners of the primary school spelling bee and the science competition. This is a remarkable accomplishment, and I'm happy that progress is being made in the school. I wish to thank the principal and teachers of L.W. Young for hosting a lunch with the students. One of them lost their classmate last year, and as a result of it, I went and sat with them and had lunch with them, about 30 of them, just to talk about their response to the death and what they think about their plans for the future. And I plan to have more lunches with some of the students just to bring them to this fact, Mr. Speaker, that they're expected to live until their 70th birthday. Some of them are going to be around, therefore, for another 60 or so years. So this is a long time for them to be able to make the right choices and to encourage them in all things, choose life and choose to be on the right side of the equation. I'm grateful to the principal and staff of the Doris Johnson School for putting some of the most successful students out in the high schools of this country. The Minister of Education has promised additional resources for the building of a track and a new entrance to ensure the safety of our students and a new perimeter wall, and I thank him. This is my focus, Mr. Speaker. The future. The future. You know, we used to see through a glass darkly, but now we see the future. I got a public school education up to primary school, and I want to ensure those teachers, Lorna Glinton, she still lives in Burnt Ground now in Long Island, from Eastern Junior, and Dawson Conliffe, who was my headmaster, Marietta Coakley, Livingston Coakley's wife, who her daughter just said that mother says that I'm the best student she ever had. Grateful for her to say it. But it's always good to be the best. But I mean, you know, these are, you know, dear souls who handed me off to Bonaventure Dean at St. Augustine's, and, you know, got a fine education within the resources of this country. And so I support this budget statement because I believe that it will work to ensure that the next generation succeeds 100-fold. And I thank you very much.